Now, Darius III is where the second phase of the Achaemenid Empire begins because this guy was messed up. I mean, he was known for deserting his army in the battlefield, and he had a very bad reputation. So, Darius III was overthrown. I mean, he died, and then he was defeated by Alexander the Great in a sense. So Alexander the Great is your second phase of the Achaemenid Empire. He continued the same empire. So Achaemenid Empire was after this point was more of like rapid expansion. So initially we had Philip the Second of Macedon. Now this guy, apart from being Alexander's father, was an accomplished king and military commander in his own right. I mean, he conquered Greece. Remember, ancient Greece we were talking about was the empire before the Achaemenid Empire. This guy had conquered them and ruled them. He had used bribery and warfare and threats to secure Greece, and he was ruling them over there. He had managed to unify them and actually they managed to make them hold their own against Persia. But his main aim was the conquest of the Persian Empire. He wanted to rule over them, and after his death, we had Alexander the Great, who fulfilled this. Um, this was kind of a very rapid expansion, the way the entire empire rose, because it was just a small state, right? You just had Greece, like a tiny little place compared to the huge, vast Achaemenid Empire, but Alexander managed to, use that. There were various factors that made his conquest successful. First, we had the imperial foundation that obviously Philip II, his dad, laid for him, right, and gave him a base, which was Greece, the armies, the gold. Then we have political instability in Persia because Darius III was known, to desert his army. People weren't happy with him, neither the public nor his political co-workers, you could say. And lastly, of course, it was his military skills and leadership abilities that made his conquest successful. So this was one example of how uh, an empire, rose. Now, this followed. There was obviously weak neighbors, right? Because what Alexander had basically done was really smart. This guy, he took over um bits and pieces of empires, like weak neighbors in the Persian Empire. So he deprived them of resources from those places. Now let's say the Achaemenid Empire before Alexander was XYZ, and Z was what provided XY, the grain, the wheat. Okay, Alexander would take over Z because it was less fortified and cut off the wheat supply to X and Y, and slowly, the economy would deteriorate. Um, then this rise also used leadership because you had Alexander, was politically strong while Darius III wasn't, but before him Cyrus was strong and so on. You obviously have wealth, right? His father provided him with the imperial foundation. You have yeah, so this is the rise of the Achaemenid Empire basically. Now we're gonna move on to Han China, which rose under very different circumstances. Han China rose through internal reform. Now, in China, the groundwork was laid by Qin Shi Huang, who was basically the first Qin dynasty emperor. Now, this guy, he had he followed extensive imperial bureaucracy. Okay, so he had strengthened basically land and power, and he made sure that all power came from the emperor. Now, the first of the Han dynasty was Han Gazu. What he did was he followed um, the imperial groundwork that the Qin dynasty laid. However, he made sure that the taxes and edicts, the harshness of them was reduced. And lastly, the Qin dynasty had suppress what was known as Confucianism, or however you pronounce that, which is nothing but a philosophical and ethical teaching. Now, Han instead promoted this openly. In fact, he made it the state ideology, and in doing so, he made them believe in moral uprightness and virtue instead of fear and oppression. And in doing so, he showed a sense of identity between all of his subjects. Um, yeah. So that was Han China. Now, when you compare Alexander and you compare Han and how they were different in their rise, you can see that culture was one major difference. While Alexander, he left cultural and political institutions intact in whatever places he conquered, Han actually didn't. He followed the policy of cultural conversion on newly conquered regions, where he made people embrace the Confucian thinking. So this was probably different because of their circumstances. While Alexander was expanding territory, he was continuing to move. Armies had to move. He wasn't settling down. The Hans just had a set amount of territory, and it was just people there that they needed to take care of. So Alexander showed that the ruler didn't interfere with daily activities and made them loyal, but Han made people embrace their thinking and then made them loyal. So there was that. Now, when you talk about how empires fall, again, there is invasion, migrants, bad leadership, succession, overexpansion, division, religion, environment, and economy. These are a few basic factors that last. But let's look at the examples again to understand that better. When we talk about Achaemenid Persia, this empire lasted 200 years. Okay, so it obviously did something right, but it kind of had um when it started to fall again, it was rapid. So firstly, but over expansion and invasion, right? Now Alexander had expanded them so far. They were already such a large empire. I mean, we saw the maps, and now they've expanded even more. And there is always power vacuums. A leader cannot be everywhere. The army cannot be everywhere. They're constantly moving and expanding more. So there's no one to look over what's going on back at the center of our empire. Then you have invasion. Obviously, first was Alexander's invasion, right, which was really smart and the bits and pieces thing. However, after that, when you left the power vacuum, when Alexander was off conquering, there were still people or generals who were trying to take over and trying to um get the throne. So that was that. Then you had economics, where again, people followed majorly Alexander's idea of conquering bits and pieces to deprive the empire of its major resources. And then you had bad leadership. I mean, Darius thought was horrible. And then after Alexander's death, with no heir, he was left with generals who had their own states, and they were all fighting over that instead of actually taking care of their people. So that probably led to their fall. And then you have Han China. Now, Han China lasted quite a long time as well, but you had internal migration and rebellion. So, the rebellion was called the Yellow Turtle Rebellion, which was partly religious and partly, sparked by lack of food, shortage of food. So, environmental factors and economic factors that left people starving and hungry, and they were annoyed, and they were not happy with the Han King, kind of. So initially, um, the kings were completely against a Confucian thinking, right? But the Han King imposed Confucian thinking, so people didn't like that. And then you had internal migration, where people, were continuously in search of better jobs, and so that caused a problem. And you have economics, which was obviously again the rebellion and the fact that people didn't have food and there were shortages and so on. And bad leadership was dissatisfaction with first the Qin and then the Han Empire. So there's this um, full circle.